Likutei Sichos, Chelik Chavtes, volume 29, the Sicha for Hoshana Rabba. This Sicha will explain the greatness of the custom that we have on Hoshana Rabba to take the Hoshanos, the Aravos, and also how this custom expresses the ultimate virtue of the connection that we have, the bond that we have with the essence of Hashem. As a quick introduction, in order to be more familiar with some of the concepts mentioned in the Sicha, we know that if the first day of Rosh Hoshana falls out on Shabbos, we don't sound the shofar. If the first day of Sichos falls out on Shabbos, again, we do not take the esrog and the lulav. Another thing to be familiar with, the concept, the idea of halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which means that there are certain things in the Torah, especially in the oral law, in Torah Shebaal Peh, that were not explicitly written in the Torah, perhaps are not even hinted in the Torah. In other words, we cannot find a trace for it, like we sometimes do, to kind of find a hint for it in the Torah. Rather, it was passed down from person to person all the way back to Moshe Rabbeinu as he received it on Har Sinai. Another thing that is well known, but it's worthwhile to go over it again, the Medrash describes the virtues of the Daled Minim, the four species that we take together on Sukkos, and that is that the esrog has a tam and a reach. It has both, represents a taste, and also it has a good aroma. And that represents Torah. Torah is tam, is a taste, because Torah is like feeds. Torah is called mazain. It feeds the body, so to speak. It nourishes the soul and gives us the actual texture, so to speak. And then ma'asim tovim, good deeds, which leave a good impression. That is good deeds, mitzvahs. That is represented in the idea of reach. Lulav only has, because it grows, is a date tree, so it has tam. The lulav itself doesn't have any taste, but rather it grows in a tree that represents taste, and that represents people who are great in Torah, but not necessarily so much in ma'asim tovim, in good deeds / mitzvahs. The hadas, the myrtle branch, that represents reach, a good aroma, which represents those who have primarily ma'asim tovim, but perhaps lack diligence in study of Torah. And then you have the arava, the willow branch, which actually lacks both. It doesn't have any expression of taste, any expression of aroma, and that represents the simple Jew that doesn't have neither. Now, in this Sicha, we're going to learn actually the correct and deeper understanding of this saying of our sages. Another thing to be familiar with, what we just mentioned, anashim pshutim, simple people. We see sometimes simple folk, simple Jews, simpletons. What are they? Typically, it's assumed that they are perhaps on a very low level, as they aren't refined nor sophisticated. However, as we'll see in the Sicha, the Baal Shem Tov actually lauded them, these very simple people. And he said that they specifically connect and channel the pshitus ha'atzmus, the ultimate, quote-unquote, simplicity of the essence of Hashem, meaning the unsophisticated and perhaps adulterated essence of Hashem. One more final thing to be familiar with, and Torah shebiksav, meaning the written Torah. Then there is Torah shebaal peh, the oral law, which typically explains Torah shebiksav and therefore is connected to Torah shebiksav. However, as already we mentioned before, there is an aspect in Torah shebaal peh which is even greater than that, which is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That means it is so oral that it was passed down so exclusively orally that it's not even hinted in the Torah. And then there is something which is even greater than that. And that is a minhag, a custom. Typically, people assume that if something that's biblical, something that's in the Torah, that is greater. However, as we're going to see in the Sicha, and as it's explained in Chassidus, in fact, it's the opposite. Something that is higher and greater could not manifest itself into actual physical words written in Torah shebiksav. Some things are even greater; they can't even manifest themselves in the intellect, so to speak, and ideas of Torah shebaal peh. And then you have and therefore the halacha l'Moshe Sinai. And then you have the ultimate, which is the custom that Jews have adopted on and taken upon themselves. In fact, it becomes so powerful that it says minhag Yisrael Toirahi, that a custom that Jews have accepted upon themselves and practiced for so long, it actually becomes Torah. So in a sense, It's our actions that bring something to be incorporated into Torah. Let's go into the Sicha. So from amongst the matters that Hoshana Rabba is distinguished from all the other days of Sukkot is that we see that Sukkot, in talking about in the Beis Hamikdash, they would circle the Mizbeach every day only once. However, on Hoshana Rabba, they would circle it 7 times. That's one thing. Another thing, all the other days of Sukkot, around the Mizbeach, they would erect these very tall Hoshainos, very tall aravos, that is, willow branches, that would decorate the Mizbeach from all around. But that was done only if it fell out in a weekday. That means the 6 days of Sukkot, if it fell out in a weekday, then they would erect them. If it was on a Shabbos, any day of Sukkot fell on a Shabbos, then they wouldn't put up these aravos. However, in the Beis Hamikdash, Hoshana Rabbah, the 7th day, they would erect the aravos, they would erect the Hoshanas, even if it fell out on a Shabbos. Now, this is as far as the Beis Hamikdash is concerned. Nowadays, it says in Halacha that we don't take the aravos all the 7 days of Yontif. Only, exclusively, when do we take aravos? When do we do the Hoshanas? Exclusively on the 7th day on Hoshana Rabbah, because this is Zeicher LeMikdash. This is to remember, to commemorate, to memorialize the Beis Hamikdash. This is one thing. Another significant aspect of Hoshana Rabbah, which is also post the Churban Beis Hamikdash, post the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, that means nowadays, is that they set up the calendar in such a manner that Hoshana Rabbah could never, ever, ever fall out on Shabbos. And this isn't for the purpose that we should never miss the observance of doing Hoshanas, of taking these aravos, these willow branches on Hoshana Rabbah. Tosfos asks a very interesting question, a very obvious one. It would seem that when it comes to shofar, it comes to lulav, we don't make any extra effort. There's no clause to ensure that the calendar is set up in such a way that the first day of Sukkot or the first day of Rosh Hashanah should not fall on a Shabbos. And those are biblical commandments. Why is it that for Arava, which really at the end of the day, it's merely a commemoration, it's a memorialization of the Beis Hamikdash, and therefore it's only like a custom, why is it that we do make that emphasis that it should not fall on a Shabbos? And Tosfos answers that since Lulav and Shofar and Lulav are written explicitly in the Torah, so the Chachamim were not concerned that it would become forgotten or overlooked or perhaps disregarded or not treated with the utmost respect for what they deserve. However, Arava, this mitzvah of taking the Aravos on Hoshana Rabbah, since it's only midrabanan, it's only like a custom, therefore they had to kind of emphasize it, they had to make it strong, they had to galvanize it in order that it not be forgotten. This is the halachic reason that's given. However, says the Rebbe, we know that everything in the Torah is with the utmost precision. And therefore it's understood that since they made such an adjustment in the calendar, put such an emphasis that Arava should always be performed, always be observed on Hoshana Rabbah, that tells us that this mitzvah has something very extraordinary in it, and that makes it so unique, different than all the other mitzvahs. And the question is, what is that? So the Rebbe says we'll understand what it is by taking a look and appreciating the halachic status. What is the halachic status of the mitzvah of Arava? Is it an extension of the mitzvah of lulav? Right? In the lulav there's 4 kinds, and one of them is aravos. So is it an extension of that, or is it like a standalone mitzvah with its own uniqueness, with its own qualities, without getting into the details of what the ramifications would be if you say this way or that way? Says the Rebbe, from the Rambam, it comes out that it's an exclusive, standalone mitzvah, separate from the Daled Minim. And he paskins like, and there's a debate about this, and he paskins like the Chachamim, that the mitzvah's Arava, the mitzvah of taking the Arava in the Beis HaMikdash, says the Rambam, was halacha l'Moshe misinai. And we did not learn it from any pasuk. There's no trace for it in the Torah. Rather, exclusively something that's been passed down orally from Moshe Rabbeinu. That's halachically speaking. If we look at it now from more of an esoteric look, in other words, what is the reason that the mitzvah of Arava is such an exclusive mitzvah? So the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, says regarding the underlying idea of the mitzvah of Arava, he says that Arava represents the Anoshim Pshutim, the simple Jews, the simple Yidden, that their mitzvahs that they do, their observance of Torah mitzvahs, is with emunah pshuta, with this simplicity, with simple faith. This gives us an insight, a correct perspective in what the Medrash says regarding the four kinds of Yidden that are represented in the four species, Esrog, Lulav, Hadassim, and Aravas. Now, it's understood that it cannot be meant literally as it seems. Because you can't say, for example, that the Lulav represents a Jew who only learns Torah and does not perform any Ma'asim Tovim, any mitzvahs. That is impossible, because we know that the whole purpose of learning Torah is to lead to action. And if one learns Torah and does not compel him, does not bring him to do mitzvahs, then his Torah learning is also worthless. So it's obvious that we're talking about somebody who studies Torah and does mitzvahs, yet his main aspect is Torah. And likewise for the other kinds. The question is, what does it mean? What does it mean then? If it can't mean, if it is not meant literally, the answer is, learning Torah is primarily connected to the quality of intellect. The performance of mitzvahs are primarily connected to the quality of one's emotional attributes, one's midos, one's emotions. And what the Medrash does is it lays out the different types of Yidden. The Esrog is somebody who has both. He has the greatest virtues. Both he's excels in the intellectual aspect of Torah mitzvahs, and he excels in the emotional aspects of Torah mitzvahs. The Lulav is somebody who excels. His main quality is that he excels in the intellectual aspect of Torah. When it comes to the true quality of performance of mitzvahs, yes, he does mitzvahs, but he doesn't excel in the emotional aspect of things. The Hadas is somebody who excels in the emotional aspects of things, but when it comes to knowledge of Torah and it comes to the intellectual aspect of things, he doesn't excel. The Arava is a Yid who, does Torah mitzvahs. He learns some Torah, he does some mitzvahs, and so on and so forth. Like every Yid has to do. He's an observant Jew. But he does not have any qualities, any visible qualities, any qualities that can really be pointed out, both in the intellect and in the emotional aspect of things. But what he does have is that he does Torah and mitzvahs with true, simple faith. That is what the Medrash really means, based on what the Frierdiker Rebbe explains. So in other words, the Medrash is talking about only about the level of the sophistication involved in the observance of Torah mitzvahs. The Anoshim Pshutim do not possess any sophistication, any sophisticated levels in the observance of Torah mitzvahs, rather emunah pshuta. And as we know that this is not less than, but as we said in the introduction, this is more than. The Baal Shem Tov emphasized and stressed, he was the one who lauded the idea that the pshitus of Anoshim Pshutim, the simplicity of the simple people, is actually connected to the pshitus ha'atzmus, to the simplicity of the essence of Hashem, the, so to speak, unsophisticated simplicity of Hashem. This virtue that simple people have is reflected in the Arava itself, is reflected in the actual willow branch. Chassidus explains, it's explained in various places of Chassidus and Kabbalah, that what unifies the four species that we take together on Sukkos is this attribute of unity. You see it, for example, in the lulav, where its leaves are all intertwined, are all connected. In the hadas, the hadassim, the myrtle branch, we know that there have to be three coming out of the same spot in order for it to be perfect, to be kosher. three leaves coming up from the same spot. There's an achdus, there's a unity there. In the esrog, what do we see? The Torah calls it a pre-ate hodar, which means literally beautiful fruit, but also hodar, that Gemara tells us that it means hadar, that it lives, it dwells in the tree, that it grows in the tree for 4 full seasons. Most fruits and produce do not. They have their exclusive seasons that they need to grow in. The esrog not only grows in all seasons, not only it tolerates all seasons, so to speak, it doesn't get ruined by the cold or the heat or whatever it may be, but rather that helps it grow and helps perfect it. So it is a total achdus. However, when it comes to the arava, we try and find something even more extraordinary. The arava in the Gemara is called achvena, which means a unity. Why? Because they grow in unity. If you see the way they grow, they're all bunched up together. They're all unified together. All the willow branches kind of like intertwine and become like one thing. So you see the unity. Now, this idea that these 4 species reflect the idea of unity, even though that they are in this world, and this world is a world of plurality. So the question is, how do they specifically have unity? That tells us that because they have an expression, there's something special about them. For whatever reason, Hashem chose that these 4 kinds have an expression of the achdus apshuta, in them shine the simple oneness, the unity of Hashem. Now, although these 4 kinds reflect the idea of unity, yet the idea of unity stands out utmost in the arava, in the willow branch. How is that? All the 3 other kinds, that's the esrog, the lulav, the hadas, their unity is expressed within themselves, meaning they have an aspect of unity. Either like the esrog, it grows through all 4 seasons, or the lulav, it is connected within itself, and the hadas with the 3 leaves that come out of the same point. That is so to speak, a personal unity. Whereas the arava has the utmost unity because it says that it's called achvana, and that's, by the way, why it gets the name. It's the only one that is, so to speak, honored with this name. The esrog is not a name of unity. The lulav is not a name of unity. The hadas is not a name of unity. The arava is called achvana in the Gemara because it represents the ultimate unity, which is it grows together with the other aravas. And therefore we understand that the idea of achdus apshuta, that the utmost oneness of Hashem being reflected in something is reflected the most in the arava. In other words, you see it in the name itself of this species. Now, this idea that the arava represents the ultimate oneness and it's connected to the ultimate state of unity of Hashem is actually expressed in the fact that the arava is the most unsophisticated. It's true that all the other species, all the other 4 species, esrog, lulav, and hadas, they all have an expression of achdus. They all represent the idea of unity, but yet they all have their own personal expression. In other words, their unity could be also attributed to their particular virtue, their particular expression that they have. So it's not in the purest form. Whereas arava, besides the aspect of its unity, it does not have any other expression. It possesses absolutely no sophistication whatsoever, not in the intellect, not in the emotion, nothing, just pure simplicity, just pure unity. And that's why in the arava you see it the most. And now we can appreciate the difference between, and now we can appreciate why the Rambam paskins that the arava that was in the Beis HaMikdash, the arava that they put around the Mizbeach, is separate from the mitzvah of the Daled Minim. In other words, it's not inherently in the same class. It's in a class of its own. It's a separate mitzvah, standalone. What is the idea? You see, the arava that we tie together with the other kinds, with the Daled Minim, True, it has its own personal, exceptional expression of unity, and its own personal expression of unsophisticated simplicity. But at the end of the day, it has to become one with the other kinds, right? It gets tied together. And when you do the mitzvah, it's only about bringing them all four together. So it's not an ultimate exclusive unity. Whereas the arava that was put around the Mizbeach, it came alone. It stand alone. It's exclusive. It does not mix or blend with anything else. It has its own own perfect, simple, exclusive expression. And that is the arava itself. And this is the reason, actually, why it's brought down in halacha. And in fact, the Arizal stresses this very much, al pi Kabbalah, that when we go around the bima on Hoshana Rabbah 7 times at the Lulav and Esrik, we should not take the arabas, the Hoshanas that we're going to buy, we should not hold it together with it, because it's 2 separate things, as we just explained. Now, we'll also get to appreciate, understand, why the arava that's in the mikdash, why the mitzvah of putting the arabas around the mizbeach is not written in the Torah, and it's only halacha l'Moshe Sinai, was passed down from Moshe to Sinai, exclusively Torah Shebal Peh. And this is along the same lines that the Alter Rebbe explains why the nisuch hamayim, the pouring of the water on Sukkot, is also not written in the Torah. And he says, because it comes from such a high point of godliness, it comes from such a high point that it's not able to manifest itself in written words that have a form, that have a, so to speak, a finite image. And therefore it can only be disseminated, so to speak, only in an oral manner, which is more abstract. And likewise over here, because the arava comes from such a high point, the unity that's in it, that gets mirrored in it, that gets transmitted through it, is the achdus apshuta, the simplicity of the oneness of Hashem, and the simplicity of the atzmus of Hashem, the pshutus ha'atzmus. Therefore, it cannot come down in the form of letters in the Torah Shebiksav, and it gets passed down as halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Following this, it comes out that the arava, meaning the haishainish, that we do nowadays, is even greater than the mitzvah of arava that was done in the Beis Hamikdash. How so? You see, the arava that was done in the Beis Hamikdash, as we said, is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. However, the arabas that are done now, the Hoshanas that we take now, is only a minhag nevihim. It's only a custom that was passed down for us from the era of the prophets. So it's a custom. It's a minhag. It's not even halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's a minhag. Now, this is along the lines that the Rebbe explains that the hakafis that we do on Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah is also only a minhag. And yet, of course, everybody sees, and this is a fact, that the joy that we do this mitzvah in transcends the joy of any mitzvah that we do throughout the entire year. So that tells us what? That it's not less than, as we explained in the introduction, it's actually more than. A minhag Yisrael, says the Rebbe, is an indicator that it comes from an innate bond, an innate connection between the Yid and the source of his soul, which is, of course, Hashem, that is even higher than Torah. It's beyond, it transcends even the level of Torah. And this explains why the minhag cannot even be written, not even in Torah Shebal Peh, not even halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai is still Torah. And the fact is that by a Yid implementing this minhag, which comes from the deepest point, from the source of his soul, which is connected to the source, which is Hashem himself, the essence of Hashem, by virtue of this, then this minhag now becomes Torah. In other words, it dictates the Torah. It becomes minhag Yisrael Torah. And now we can also explain, understand, and appreciate why this never will fall out on Shabbos. Because understanding and appreciating how important the mitzvah of arava is, what it represents, we can understand that the Chachamim wanted to ensure that it goes uninterrupted. This is something that is so important that you can't skip a year here and there and not observe it. Rather, it has to be seamless all the time, because this represents the highest point of the highest connection between us and Hashem. That is, again, pshitus ha'atzmus and pshitus ha'achdus, the oneness, this of Hashem, the essence of Hashem that we connect to.